So, welcome everyone to this episode in our career series. We have Wilson Sonsini with us again today, and a very interesting practice that most students will never see in their first year of law school, and few even in their second year, but an incredibly interesting practice area, but difficult to learn about from inside the law school. So, we wanted to bring you this session to help you see a really interesting practice. So with us, we have two attorneys from Wilson Sonsini, Stephanie McFall from the Seattle office of Wilson, and Scott Zimmermann from the San Francisco Bay Area offices of Wilson. So thank you both for joining us.
Great to be here.
So I'm going to start with the basic question. When I look at your websites, you have a practice that most other firms don't list, and that's an energy and climate solutions practice. So students know what corporate law is, what litigation is, but what is an energy and climate solutions practice?
Well, that's a good question. And so maybe what I'll start with just is kind of what you will find on our website and every other big law firm's website is a listing of kind of the traditional legal practice areas, M&A, venture finance, corporate finance, employment, litigation, et cetera, IP, of course. And those are all, one might, if you think of it from a business perspective, kind of like the horizontal, like the skill set that a lawyer brings and specializes in. But it's horizontal applied across many different industries, right? Many different types of businesses. So if you just imagine, for example, an employment lawyer, someone who negotiates employment agreements and helps people with their compensation or helps companies define that, that would apply to a company that's operating in any industry at all. And what's a bit unique about what Stephanie and I, the practice that we're in, is that we're a corporate practice that actually focuses on a vertical. In other words, a specific slice of the industry. Energy is, people say, 10 to 15% of the US economy, the global economy. We're focused on the energy industry that is that vertical. And what I'll just say, and I'll let Stephanie jump in as well and continue, but something that's a little bit, that you would notice that's unique, where we are called the Energy and Climate Solutions Group. We've actually chosen to brand and call ourselves, use those words, because the energy industry has a big impact on climate change. And we do specifically work with companies and investors and that are seeking to really innovate in the energy space. And innovation involves cleaner ways to produce energy, less carbon intensive ways to produce energy, but also the whole host of technologies that are separate from energy, but that relate to climate change technologies specifically. Those technologies where you might be removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or reducing the amount that goes in non-industry energy industries like steel and cement and that sort of stuff. So we consider all of that type of sustainable infrastructure and the development of projects for that sustainable infrastructure, development of technologies for it, and then the financing of it. We consider that's the vertical, or many verticals, you might say, that Stephanie and I and our team work within. So a little bit unique, but Stephanie, I'll let you add anything that you might have from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. Not much to add. I guess the thing that comes to mind is sort of when you talk about the focus on the industry instead of maybe other groups which have a focus on a type of transaction. It means that our group consists of attorneys who all have some sort of different and interesting specialties around that industry. So we have people who are really focused on tax, people who are focused on, more typical corporate work, people who are doing power purchase agreements, construction, financing. It's sort of the different aspects of the law brought in as experts on an industry. So it's an interesting and fun model because you just learn so much from each other as you're working too. So that's what I would add to that.
It's a great way to help students understand this difference because, like I said, websites are often organized around corporate or litigation, and classes are usually organized around that. And that works for a lot of generalists, but there are generalist corporate lawyers, but you're really in this sophisticated area that a generalist can only dabble, and you really need this kind of deep knowledge within this area. So I think that helps when you look at a website and you read, like all law firm websites, if you read the bios, people do a little of everything. Your bios read differently. You don't do a little of everything. You do a lot of this. So I think that's a great explanation.
Well, Wayne, and what I'll say though as well, like is let's take an M&A lawyer, someone who does corporate mergers and acquisition, buying and selling companies, merging companies together. Our colleagues who work in that space and specialize in that, we kind of do some of that within our industry, but our colleagues who spend 100% of their time doing that, when they are doing an acquisition of a company, whether it's an energy company or it's a biotech company or whatever it is, for that 3-month period or whatever it is that they're working on that, they become experts in that company, in that industry. And because you have to, because it's so intense and it's a lot of really important, interesting issues. And so there is an opportunity to gain that kind of real insight into specific industries. But as soon as that energy M&A deal closes, they might be onto a biotech M&A deal, or they might be onto a software M&A deal. And so there's still opportunity to get really deep and really in. I'm amazed at how much our colleagues in some of these other industries really can pick up stuff in our industry. But when I say our industry, I mean the energy industry. But so there's kind of different ways to approach that. And I think if you're looking, when you are talking to, when students are talking to, considering where to go, like kind of even in other groups, they may not brand themselves like we do, but they're still going to be individual attorneys who maybe do mostly the same type work within a certain industry. And so trying to seek that out, if that's what you're interested in, might work too.
Well, just to kind of demystify this, when we talk about the energy and climate solutions, sometimes the best way to do that is to understand what clients you work for and what kind of projects you end up doing for those clients. So either in the abstract, if you can't identify particular clients or deals or anything you can identify specifically, kind of to help students understand what this would look like and who they would be working with.
Sure, I can start. Yeah, so in my day-to-day, I typically work for project developers, so clients who are building or buying or operating energy projects. That's sort of the vast majority of my work. And that's, whether they're building a project or acquiring a project, rights and land pre-construction and taking it all the way through construction, or if they're buying and operating existing projects or buying portfolios or financing. It's for the clients who are building, developing, owning, operating energy projects. That's the type of client I work for. I think
maybe I'll give an example that kind of fits within that, and maybe shows kind of how we focus on the vertical as well. Is one of our clients that's not confidential is actually a Alameda County based, not in Berkeley, but in Alameda, company called Kairos Power. They're an advanced nuclear technology developer, nuclear fission. And we do all sorts of work for them across different types of transactions and that. But one of the things, so they're developing new technology for improved, call it generation for small modular reactor designs. And so to as you know, kind of just to build a specific example on what Stephanie was saying, is we've recently helped them, negotiate a sale of power from their first projects to Google. Google has a big need for power now and into the future for data centers and all of that. And Google has strong sustainability goals, which you can look up on their website, and carbon net zero goals. And so they're looking for new technologies that will provide cheaper, cleaner ability to power their business. And so, we helped Kairos negotiate some purchase and sale of energy from their first projects with Google. So that's was a really fun, interesting project that kind of gives a little bit of color to what Stephanie was saying.
Well, I mean, Wilson's got this tremendous reputation, and I think the students bump into it first about emerging company, ECVC work. What I hear from the two of you is that your client base is well beyond that emerging companies practice. This is established, well-funded, large companies.
Well, I'll say it's across the board. So we've got plenty of the early stage stuff, and we hope to help them grow and then do the larger transactions as well. So it really is kind of across the spectrum there. So, but I think what's a little different is where other firms and there's again great groups that do different things, but in other firms maybe the organization is a little bit different in the sense that they have an ECVC practice that helps the startup or the private company raise money, and then whether or not they can help with like the transaction I just described is kind of dependent on the firm, and what we don't tend to see is where they're organized together like how we are. So we would have some of the same team and some of the same people kind of helping across, really helping the company across those different types of transactions. But we've got plenty of startups here too. Yeah. So,
well, that's good. I mean, again, sometimes students just have a limited perspective. They've met just a few attorneys, and so they don't see the whole viewpoint. So it's nice to know that whole piece is there. And other firms that all they do is giants. They don't have any small clients. So it helps students calibrate to know that difference. Well, it's always an interesting question to see the journey of people, how they wound up in their practice. Students often are fearful that I've got to make the right choice because my first choice is my only choice I ever get. I'm either stuck here or I'm out of law. And it's a terrifying way to go through life, thinking my first semester of law school, I've got to know exactly how I'm going to spend the next 30 years of my legal career. So it's great to know how people found their way from law school to their current practice. Is this, I'll start with the questions. This what you always envisioned doing from the day you stepped into law school?
Scott, you want to go?
I'll go. Well, I'll just say I definitely, when I stepped into law school, did not envision that I would spend 18 years at a law firm, which is how long I've been at Wilson. And in fact, I would say that I didn't. It was a number of years after working here that I, have felt more and more enjoyment and kind of certainty that it's what I want to do, or what I would continue doing. I guess I'll just say from a personal perspective, I've always frankly looked at I've never really been a long-term, really super long-term, what am I going to be doing in 10 years? That's just not really the way I've looked at my career. I think that's personal, and it depends a little bit on each individual, your perspective. But for me, I've always taken it in much smaller chunks and looked at kind of what's coming up next. And I'll just maybe speak a little bit about how I ended up here, given that actually I'll just say if I were to guess, for myself, when I started, I went to Berkeley Law School. And when I started, I kind of imagined that I would want to be in either in government or doing something on the policy side, whether for a nonprofit or something that was related to. I did want to work in clean energy at the time. At the time, the solar industry was like nothing, basically, and the wind industry was kind of small. And there wasn't any other clean energy industry, basically, in the US or anywhere. And I kind of imagined that what I wanted to do was help create a policy environment that would encourage more clean energy development. That was what was in my mind as a goal. And I recognize that a lot of students, Wayne, I know this is for students, and like they may not come into law school with that kind of, but I'm just kind of the message I really want to say is like, think about what's interesting to you, because that's going to make whatever decision you make better. It's going to help you connect with the right people. And that open-mindedness for me, like I kind of knew at least what I wanted to do, to some degree. And what I found was that when I was getting towards the end of law school, and I know that's also just a different recruiting scenario than it was 18 years ago. But when I was getting to the end of law school, there was actually now starting to be some companies out there that were building solar technologies and building solar projects. And there were a couple of lawyers out there that were helping them. And I actually found those people, and they were working at Wilson, or they wanted to work at Wilson, because Wilson was working with the companies that were innovating in the energy industry. Mm-hmm. And so I got really lucky. It was a different time back then in my industry, but there are those kind of emerging companies, and then lawyers, maybe if you want to work for a law firm, lawyers who are thinking about how do I work with those innovators and those entrepreneurs. And that's what attracted me and kept me open-minded, such that I actually took this job as a 3L. Like I interviewed as a 3L and took it, and did summer here. And so there were a lot of things that were lucky that I ended up here. But I think that that focus on thinking about what you really want, and it doesn't need to be so specific like what I described, or even energy specific. But I think anyway, that's kind of my story, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities in that I also was pretty focused on climate, but I guess so. I took some time. I didn't go to law school right out of college. I worked for a few years for the government, some time in DC on Capitol Hill doing energy policy and other issues, and went to law school. And I already knew in my career that I wanted to focus on sort of the problem of climate change. That was a guiding principle for me. What exactly that looked like as a lawyer, I didn't really know that until I started talking to people at law school. I didn't really know what opportunities were out there. There's environment laws, energy law, but if you're an environmental lawyer, you're probably not necessarily working on transactions like this. You're definitely not working on energy projects, but, a lot of these things get thrown around in law school and people don't really know what's out there. But, started talking to people really early on about, what are some constructive things you can do with legal skills and sort of the climate change energy space. And, those conversations just helped me focus in on the idea that there's sort of transactional work out there supporting energy projects that needs sophisticated legal support, and there's a market for it. And learning that then allows you to figure out what law firms are doing that work and have those conversations. And it gets narrow pretty fast. And a lot of people are doing great work, but at the time that I was out there, there certainly weren't very many groups focused this intently on the same exact goal that I wanted to focus on in my career. So that's how I ended up here. And I did get to summer at Wilson in this group and started my career here. And it's been rewarding and really has allowed me to use my legal education on energy and climate issues. So it's that's my answer.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to view it. Both of you had a kind of macro view of what you wanted to be involved in, and then found your way to the particular practice group. So you weren't just starting, I want to be a corporate lawyer. And as a litigator myself, I'm not sure why anybody ever wants to be a corporate lawyer. I'm still working on that one. But you had an idea. I
Feeling is
wanted to.
mutual.
I, I keep hearing that, but I can explain to you why it's better to be a litigator if you're curious. It's better to be a former litigator. That's the happiest place to be.
I see.
But um, but I like that idea, and I like that concept of, hey, what kind of what's your macro view? Where do you see yourself being involved? And then working within that to find the law firm, the practices that fit. And I love that, Stephanie, your, environmental law versus, clean energy law. Those end up in very different places 10 years down the road. So, but it's not obvious to a first, second, or third year law student how that ends up. So that's
Certainly not. And there's a lot of overlap in law school. I think, a lot of the same journals and things like that. People are really focused on both, which is great. But understanding sort of the different pathways and careers that come out of those.
Well, let me take you from that piece, from how you wound up there to really that guidance for students is if they're thinking about, hey, that idea, climate, is someplace I would like to be involved. You can see some students automatically saying, well, big law wouldn't be interested in climate. They're only, or environment, they're only representing one side of this. How would you encourage students to investigate firms, practice areas, to really engage with this idea of I want to be involved with climate, when they have to do that in their first semester now? They're trying to figure out at the same time, where their con law class is and what they need to figure out if they want to be a climate lawyer or involved in climate at all. How do they get started in kind of this early piece of their career? What would you tell them?
Well, what I can say is, first of all, look at the firms, that look at whatever the list of firms that are out there, but that are in the geographic areas that you would want to live, and look at the individual practice groups, look at the attorneys who are listed as energy attorneys or whatever it is, or environmental law, which is a completely different area, or energy regulatory, which is often a different area. But look at the bios of the people that that are the partners in the group and the associates. Look at what kind of deals they have listed there that they're promoting as the deals that they're proud of, the deals that they are seeking to do more of, right? I mean, if they're advertising that they closed a deal, it's because they want clients, future clients that are going to do similar deals to call them, to help them with the next 20 of those kinds of transactions. And so are they describing their practice in the way that it sounds exciting to you to get to know that person, to work with the clients that they work with and to do the deals that they're promoting? Does that align with your, whether it's an interest that's more, kind of an industry? Is it a moral and a personal mission that you have? Like Stephanie and I think we're kind of saying that we started by setting the mission as a criteria, one of the criteria. But it doesn't have to be that way, of course, right? Like, you can, there are lots of other ways that are criteria. Like, I want to work with someone who's really, going to be a good mentor, right? And is in the right space. I mean, those other criteria have to be there too. But I just think, yeah, like, and I guess I wouldn't be shy about kind of being yourself. Like, if you came to this link and you clicked on something that said energy and climate solutions and you were interested, I'm guessing that, we're all kind of assuming that you have some interest in, in climate change and that. And so don't be afraid when you're interviewing, or when you send a cover letter to try to get an interview. to say why you're interested. Like I know it may not be the best way to get the maximum number of interviews from the most number of firms, but I do think it's a better way to zero in if that is truly important to you. If it isn't, and you just want to work in the energy industry and get general energy industry experience, then don't mention that, because that's going to turn off. Some of the firms will say, wait a second, they're going to be selective, and they're going to say, well, this deal meets my criteria and this one doesn't. Like, that's not going to help you get a job with certain firms. So I think, it's a little bit hard sometimes to tease that out of what you read on a bio that's all polished and on the internet. But I think, but that doesn't mean that these aren't real people behind it. So whatever you can do to see what these people are doing, if they're things that they're touting are an equal number of natural gas pipelines and oil pipelines together with a few solar projects, like that sends a message, a pretty clear message, that that's what you're going to be doing if you work with them and on their team.
So the last question for the two of you. I'm a student that's interested in this area. I'd like to learn more. I have access to the great law libraries of law schools. What should I be reading or subscribing to? In my world, it's Law 360. Kind of tells you about every patent case. Where should they go to kind of see what's happening, prepare for interviews, learn a little bit more? Any resources?
Stephanie, do you have ideas?
I thought this was gonna go towards like what classes should you take in law school, and I do have some thoughts about that, but curious.
Well,
Yeah.
You can give that answer too. But I do like to know what you read to kind of stay up, so a student can take a look at those articles or journals or whatever too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'd say that on the class front, would think depends on the school, but Berkeley is great about offering energy classes, renewable energy classes. I took as many as I could. Secured transactions, property, the things sort of touch on the construction of projects, was something that I found really valuable when I started my work. Yeah, Scott, curious about what you'd say about the reading question.
Yeah. And I'll say what the resources that I use are to keep up with what's happening in the industry. They're not so much the legal side of things that I'm going to mention now, but more where, because I want to be working with those entrepreneurs who are starting those new companies and starting, building those new, deploying those new clean energy projects. And so heat map is one, very digestible. There's 5 points a day, like can read it like in like a few seconds, basically, headlines. And then they have a lot of deep dive stuff. So that's one. CTVC talks about financing, early stage financing of all sorts in the clean tech industry and climate industries. Utility Dive is somewhat more traditional news source for latest developments in the energy industry more broadly, but it doesn't focus as much on clean energy, but more energy industry stuff broadly. But frankly, most of the energy industry in the US these days is clean energy, notwithstanding, recent efforts. And then I guess the final one would be Canary Media. They have a lot of good reporting, a couple of great articles a week on recent developments, and so those are the areas that I look at the most often.
There's some things like New Project Media. I'm not sure if I imagine they're available maybe to students. I'd have to. Some of them are behind paywalls, but there are some. That's a great resource too.
Okay. You both end with a fantastic reminder that the best lawyers are deeply involved in their client's business. You can't separate out being a good lawyer from being a good business person, and at least not successfully.
I think that's good advice.
Well, I'm just summarizing your advice. So So I appreciate that, but it is a good reminder that, especially for students that are immersed in law school every day, the law is, you know, it's a tool to get to a business solution, and you got to know your client's business if you're going to help them. Uh,
Well, and to add on, just to build on that point, if I was a law student or if I'm a lawyer, which I am, I know that within my lifetime, even my lifetime, there's going to be massive changes because of AI, and that's going to hit all of us in every industry, but law included. And and it's just going to continue the pressure that we've had in our industry to be more strategic advisors, to understand things conceptually and be able to explain them clearly to our clients, to help them, to be partners with them and help them navigate difficult issues. And it's going to be less important to do stuff that can be automated,
mhm.
drafting a contract and spell checking it. And like those skills are still super critical, but for now, but I don't know how much longer they're going to be critical because hopefully we'll have good tools, good software tools to help us with that stuff and allow us to help more on the business side of things, and we'll think about how the business and legal interplay with each other. And I think that's frankly exciting. We can get into the philosophical debate about the less exciting part of it or scary part, but there is an exciting part.
I'm with you on that. I think the market for great business advisors that deal with law and business advice, AI won't take that job. I can guarantee it. So, well, I wanted to thank you both. This is a great introduction to what the two of you do and how students can think about learning more about it and find their way to you if that's where they want to head.